What would you do if a man spat in your face just because of your skin color? And what if that man was the mayor of your city? This is the story of how an act of racism blinded a politician, unaware that the man he scorned had been a general in his country, a hero who had already faced far more than hatred. What will happen when revenge arrives with the truth? The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, but the city of Chicago still held its embracing heat. The streets were filled with vehicles and the hustle and bustle of pedestrians, but something in the air felt premonitory, as if something big was about to happen. The city's mayor, Richard Davies, known for his harshness and authoritarian character, was taking a stroll downtown to supervise urban development projects. People eyed him warily, some with respect, others with distrust. The town feared him, but few dared to speak against him. As he walked along the sidewalk, the murmurs grew more intense. People pointed at him, some opening their mouths to fire malicious comments about his exclusionary policies. The mayor, however, continued walking with his firm stride, eyes fixed on the ground, as if the city belonged to him. He didn't care what they thought of him. Suddenly, a man with a weathered face and humble clothes, bearing a large scar across his cheek, approached him. He was a man of color, his presence notably distinct among the rest of the crowd surrounding the mayor. As soon as Davies saw him, he frowned, as if the mere sight of him made him uncomfortable. He was a man he preferred to avoid, an immigrant in a city not built for people like him. "Excuse me, Mr. Mayor," the man said in a deep voice, his tone calm, but with a spark of firmness. "I've come to talk about the situation in the low-income neighborhoods. People are suffering. The conditions are inhumane. You said you would improve all of this, but what do you know about improvements, huh?" Davies interrupted, looking up with an expression of scorn. "Just look at this place, thanks to your kind. You have no right to ask me for anything." The man grimaced, but stood firm. "I'm not your enemy. I only seek justice," he replied. Davies, feeling rage swell within him, let out a mocking laugh. "Justice for you people, huh? Justice for those who sneak in and snatch what we've worked for. Don't play the martyr, friend. This country isn't for dirty people to come and demand what doesn't belong to them." The mayor was so agitated that he could no longer hear what the man was saying. A crowd began to form around them, but no one dared to intervene. At that moment, the man took a step forward, perhaps hoping something would change, but Davies's reaction was immediate. Without thinking, he spat with all his might into the man's face. The sound of the spit resonated in the air, and the crowd fell into a tense silence. The man stood motionless, tears of rage and humiliation held back in his eyes. It was clear the mayor had no idea who he was dealing with. No one knew. "Get out of here," Davies said coldly, looking away. The man didn't react immediately. He stood there with the spit on his face as the crowd began to murmur more loudly. Some laughed, others fell silent, but all watched expectantly. What they didn't know was that the man, that immigrant with scars on his face, had been a general in his native country. A general who had fought in war, a man who had served with honor and sacrifice, a man who, despite everything, never forgot what he had lived through. When the man turned, he said nothing. He walked slowly, with the spit still on his face, while the mayor, satisfied, turned to continue his way, unaware that that action would mark him for life. 2 days later, the mayor couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that man's face, and the image haunted him like an unyielding shadow. He didn't understand why he had done what he did, why he had reacted so viscerally. The racism that so deeply inhabited him had led him to do something he now regretted. The next day, the mayor summoned his advisors and asked them to thoroughly investigate the man. At first, the reports arrived fragmented, but it was when the mayor saw the man's military record that everything changed. This man had been a leader, a hero, and somehow, everything he thought he knew about him had been a lie he himself had constructed. He wasn't just any immigrant. He was a former general of an army who had fought for his country, who had defended his people with blood, sweat, and tears. His name was Marcus Jones, and upon discovering this, Davies felt as if the weight of guilt was crushing him. "What have I done?" he asked himself, looking at that man's face, now so clear in his mind. Mayor Davies's regret was as profound as the contempt he had shown. However, he didn't know how to begin to redeem what he had done. The following days were tense, filled with nervousness and constant anxiety. Reports on General Jones trickled in, and soon the news of the humiliation he had suffered began to leak. The city's murmurs grew increasingly intense. People in town began talking about what had happened, and the truth spread like wildfire. The first demonstration occurred in the Central Market. A group of citizens, angered and offended by the treatment received by a man who had fought for his country, began to demand a public apology from the mayor. The indignation grew, and comments on social media became more virulent. Criticisms of Davies multiplied. The racist mayor, a man without honor. We can't allow a guy like him to keep governing. Protests began to gain strength, and people started demanding his immediate resignation. Davies tried to weather the storm by calling a press conference, where he offered an empty apology, unsure how to channel his regret. It was an impulsive act, he said, and I apologize to everyone who felt offended. But his apology carried no weight. The community could not forget what he had done, and while he thought he could manage the crisis, the situation intensified even further. Meanwhile, Marcus Jones, the man who had been publicly humiliated, was at home, meditating on what had happened. No one knew anything about him during those days. He had disappeared from public view, but within him, pain and anger continued to grow. The humiliation he had suffered was not something he could easily leave behind. No, he was not going to stand idly by. The townspeople didn't know his story, and he was going to make sure they did. Jones didn't need violence to get his revenge. He didn't need it to demonstrate his power. Instead, he used the only resource he had left, the truth. For years, he had kept his story, his life as a soldier, in silence, for after his exile, he had renounced war and everything related to it. But now, the time for hiding was over. The humiliation he suffered was not just his own. It was that of his people, his community. Davies's racism and contempt would not go unanswered on a rainy afternoon. Just after the mayor's public apology, Jones decided to appear before the town. He walked with a firm stride, his face impassive, toward the main square where a demonstration against the mayor was taking place. The crowd was furious, but as they saw him, the multitude fell silent. No one recognized him immediately until he introduced himself with a microphone in hand. I am Marcus Jones, he said with a clear, deep voice, and I am not just any immigrant. I'm not just a man you scornfully called dirty or parasite. I am a man who fought for his country, and my sacrifice was never meant for me to be spat on. Jones's words resonated deeply. The crowd began to murmur, to exchange glances, to feel ashamed of the mayor's behavior. The very people who had previously shouted against Davies now felt the weight of shame. Davies knows nothing about honor. He knows nothing about what it means to risk one's life for others, Jones continued. But you chose him, didn't you? You made him mayor. Now I ask you to remember him every time you leave your homes. Remember what he did to a man who was seen as inferior because of his skin color. Remember his contempt for the lives of others. The townspeople began to change that night. In their homes, in their bars, conversations about Davies turned more bitter. The rage that had grown in the people was not just about the act of racism itself, but about the fact that someone so close to them had betrayed them with his attitude. Jones, however, was not finished. He was not content to be a mere spectator to the chaos Davies had generated. The next day, as Davies was leaving his office, he received a call on his cell phone. It was a voicemail. Richard Davies, I hope you know what you've done. This city doesn't want you, and now the truth is out. I want you to know something else. You didn't just humiliate me. You did it to an entire community. But I will not stand idly by, and this city will learn what happens when a man's dignity is forgotten, the voice on the message said. Davies, nervous, tried to ignore the threat, but he couldn't. The pressure mounted. Calls from the press and protesters outside his office kept coming. The town had risen up, and what had begun with an act of contempt and humiliation was now becoming a snowball threatening to crush him. Days later, at a press conference where the mayor tried to offer explanations, a journalist asked him sharply, How does it feel to know that this town, which you claim to represent, is calling for your head? How does it feel to be a symbol of the racism you yourself sowed? The mayor swallowed hard, but before he could answer, a large banner appeared in the background of the room, bearing Jones's face and the word vengeance. A shiver ran down his spine. The general, although a victim, had already won the battle. The town was at war, and in that war, Davies had no future. If you enjoyed this video, you have to watch this other one where a racist judge humiliates a black man in court, but is stunned to discover who he is. Click now, and we'll see you there. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and a comment.